My name is Rick Phillips. I'm Associate Professor of Sociology and Religious Studies at the University of North Florida. Even though I am based in Florida, I've spent my entire academic career studying Utah. And when you study Utah, of course, you study the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I've been doing field work in Utah for almost 20 years. When I first started in the sociology of religion, the most important paradigm or the most important question that was on the minds of people in the subfield was the idea of church growth. As a rapidly growing church at the time, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints was an important case study. So when I began studying the church, the topic that was on everyone's mind was growth. And since the 21st century, the topic that has been on everybody's mind is disaffiliation, that the narrative of growth has given way to a narrative of more and more people disengaging from the church. And so my paper is entitled From Mormon to None, Dynamics of Latter-day Saint Religious Disaffiliation in Utah. And I'm going to talk a little bit about patterns of disaffiliation within the context of the overall sociology of religion in the United States today. 20 years ago, a lot of sociologists of religion that were writing about religion in the United States, looking at a whole view of the country, were writing about religious switching. The denominations that people switch to and the denominations that people switch from. And people talked about churches that were gaining, in other words, more people switched in than switched out, and churches where people were leaving, where more people switched out than switched in. And this meshes with the narrative of church growth that was popular in the sociology of Mormonism, because the LDS church was a big net gainer. There were many more people switching in to Mormonism than were switching out. So that was the situation 20 years ago. People were thinking about religious switching, and Mormonism was seen as a gainer in the religious economy, so that was driving church growth, growth by conversion. In the 21st century, the narrative has changed. And one of the things that you see in the overall sociology of religion in the United States is a switch to a emphasis on disaffiliation from religion. So this chart is from the 2016 American Values Atlas. And you can see the sort of magenta band there are the percentage of people who have no religion, and it's broken down by age. And as you can see, that there is a sort of generational effect here. There's a general secularizing trend where people are abandoning religion, saying that they were unaffiliated. When survey researchers say, "What religion are you?" More and more they're saying none. And you can see in this chart the pronounced generational nature of that shift. Only 12% of people 65 plus are unaffiliated, but it's 38% in this survey of 18 to 29-year-olds. So it's disproportionately the case that young people are abandoning organized religion and saying that they're unaffiliated, they have no religion. And we think now that about between 25% and 33% of all U.S. adults have no religion. So this is the master trend in the United States, a shift away from switching to different religions into abandoning religion altogether. So this general secularizing trend is happening in Utah as well, but there are some differences. Recall at the national level, we talked about how people used to switch between denominations from one to the other. And now people are abandoning religion altogether. Well, one of the interesting things about Mormons is that they have always been able to, historically been able to retain a large percentage of their members, but when Mormons leave the church, they have always left for no religion. That is to say, Mormons tend not to switch for another religion. And this was found by a couple of researchers at BYU, Howard Barr and Stan Albrecht, in the 1980s, where they noticed that when Mormons leave the church, they're just done with religion altogether. More recently, in 2018, 2019, the Next Mormons from Jana Reese, a large survey of Mormon beliefs and practices has shown that when Mormons leave the church, they just quit religion, organized religion altogether. And you're seeing this happen more and more to mirror the national trend. But there are some differences between members in Utah and members in the rest of the nation. This chart presents data from the General Social Survey. And the General Social Survey is a large survey of public opinion that has been going since about 1972. And the survey asks people all kinds of questions about all kinds of things. And it asks questions about religion. And one question that it asks is, what religion are you right now? Asking respondents to reveal their current religious affiliation. But it also asks, what was your religion when you were 16? And so by comparing what people say they are now with what they say they were when they were 16, you can see the percent of people who were retained by their religious denomination. If they said, I was X when I was 16 and I'm X now. And you can look at the number of people who have either switched religion or abandoned religion. Now, I've taken all of the Mormons in the General Social Survey and grouped them together into some subgroups. So on the left side of the graph, you see all of the Mormons who answered the survey in the 20th century waves, from 1972, when the survey began, to 1999. And on the right side of the graph, you see all of the Mormons who have taken the survey in the 21st century. 2016 is the last year of clean data that I have. And I've also grouped them separated them into region. Those who live in the Intermountain West, and that's primarily Utah for Latter-day Saints. Almost all of those people live in Utah. And those who live in the rest of the nation. So if we compare Latter-day Saints who live in outside the Intermountain West or in the rest of the nation, what you see is that in the 21st century, 20 waves of the survey, 23.9% of people who said that they were LDS when they were 16 were no longer LDS when they took the survey. So that's about 1 in 4 that had left the faith. And if you fast forward to the 21st century, what you see is that about 31.5% of people outside of the Intermountain West, Mormons outside of the Intermountain West, said that they were LDS when they were 16, but they're no longer LDS now. So the shift among Latter-day Saints outside of the Intermountain West is from 23.9% to 31.5%, or if you can think of it roughly as a shift between 1 in 4 leaving the church to about 1 in 3 leaving the church. And that kind of rise in religious apostasy is fairly consistent with what we see nationwide in all kinds of denominations. A general secularizing trend where people are less likely to remain in the religion of their birth. But now look at the difference between what's happening in the Intermountain West. We'll just call it Utah. In the 20th century waves, from 1972 to 1999, only 5.6 of people, 5.6% of the Mormons in Utah say that they are a different religion than they were when they were 16. They were LDS when they're 16. There's something different now. So that means 19 out of 20, almost 95%, were retained in the church. Right? So whereas 1 in 4 outside the region had left the faith in these waves, only about 1 in 20 in Utah had. But now look at the massive increase from 5.6% to 29.9%. There's almost parity now between Mormons leaving the faith in Utah and outside Utah, whereas in the 20th century there was a huge disparity. More than 4 times as many people left the faith outside of the Intermountain West. So there's something going on here in the General Social Survey. And one of the things that you see with this dramatically accelerating rate of disaffiliation among Mormons in Utah and the Intermountain West is that the trend has coincided with the rise in the number of people who claim they have no religious affiliation in Utah. Throughout the 21st century, the second most common answer to the question, what religion are you, has always been Catholic. Catholics were the second most prominent faith in Utah, but now none is much more prominent. There are probably 3 times as many people who have no religious affiliation in Utah as there are Catholics. Now, where are all these people coming from? There may be a lot of people moving in, but one thing we know is that these people have left the LDS Church. And one thing we know is that when people leave the LDS Church, they tend to abandon religion altogether. Now, why is that? Why have Mormons always left their religion for no religion? Why is it that when Mormons leave their church, they abandon religion? And why is this happening so much more commonly in Utah now than it has in the past? And I identify 3 reasons for this. Cultural reasons, demographic reasons, and political reasons. So let's examine the cultural reasons first. In many respects, Mormon theology is a critique of mainstream Christianity, of Orthodox Christianity. One of the founding ideas of Mormonism comes from the first vision of Joseph Smith, when Joseph Smith asks God which of all the churches he should join, and he is told that they are all wrong. Mormons often talk about being members of the only true church. And of course, if you're a member of the only true church, then all of the other churches are to some degree false. And people are taught proof texts and ideas in seminary and Sunday school about mainstream Christianity and how it is in a state of apostasy, and that the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints is in fact a restoration of original Christianity. That makes it hard to switch religions. Here is Greg, one of my respondents, and here's what he says. I was taught in seminary and institute that the doctrine of the Trinity was man-made in a council of elders. So the idea that a bunch of people got together to determine the nature of God seemed pretty silly to me. So when I cut ties with the LDS Church, there wasn't really anywhere to go, because I had already determined that the God of the other churches wasn't the God of the Bible. So even though Greg had lost faith in Mormonism or decided to disaffiliate from Mormonism, he was convinced of the inadequacy of other churches from his Mormon upbringing. And just because he lost faith in Mormonism doesn't mean that he gained faith in those others. Another thing that happens is that Mormonism has a number of very unique doctrines. And these doctrines shape the way Mormons construct their spiritual lives, both within the church and their sort of independent, personal theologies. Most people have sort of personal theology that operates within the confines of their religious theology. And here's Alice talking about the premortal existence, which is a mainstay of Mormon doctrine. She says, as a little girl, I always had a strong belief in the preexistence. The idea that my parents chose me there was very comforting to me. So whatever problems I had that made me leave the church, I always still had a strong belief in a life before this life. So when I started looking at other churches, I was pretty amazed that none of them believe in the preexistence. I thought that was a general Christian doctrine like heaven or the Bible. Turns out it's unique to us. So none of the other churches ever clicked. And so sociologists talk about a religious capital approach to religious switching. So one of the rules for religious switching is it's easiest to switch religions when you don't have to relearn a lot of stuff. So if you are a Presbyterian and it's a little too liberal for you, you can easily become a Methodist without having to relearn basic Christianity. I think if you ask most Presbyterians in the pews on Sunday and most Methodists in the pews on Sunday. You know, what are the doctrinal differences between the Presbyterians and the Methodists? Even the Presbyterians and the Methodists themselves couldn't tell you what they were. If I am a Baptist in Montgomery, Alabama, and my church is a little too strict, I can go across town and find one that's a little more lax. And so you have easy switching within Protestantism between Protestant churches where you don't have to relearn all that much. You know, with Mormonism, you have different books of scripture, you have unique doctrines like premortal existence, you have a completely different system for heaven and hell. And this led Maria to say there was just too much new shit to learn. I'm too lazy to learn new church history and new church doctrine. When I was younger, I had gone to Mass with my friend a time or two, and it was like cultic weird, so I wasn't down for that. I also wasn't down for the rock and roll band at church. In other words, the cultural distance between Mormonism and any other faith was just too wide a divide. Bridging the gap just required too much relearning, too much retooling. And so rather than do all of that work, a lot of people just forsake religion altogether because it's very difficult to start, you know, fresh with brand new ideas and brand new theologies. There's almost nothing you can carry with you from Mormonism into another Protestant faith or into the Catholic faith. There are also demographic reasons why Mormons who leave the church tend to forsake religion altogether. As you can see, Utah is surrounded by some very secular states. The unaffiliated, or the nuns, are the largest religious group in Colorado, Nevada, Wyoming, Arizona, and even Idaho. Idaho's 20% LDS. There are more nuns than there are Mormons in Idaho. New Mexico is the Catholics are the largest church there, but nuns are just underneath Catholics in New Mexico. So literally all the states that surround Utah are states where people with no religion predominate. And one of the things that you see is people are moving in from those states, particularly from California, secular states, and they are having a cultural impact on Utah. Now, within Utah, Mormons' sort of market share in Utah peaked at around 75%, maybe just over 75% in the late 80s and early 90s. But now with new people moving in, that figure has begun to drop. And then as people have moved in, people that are secular, it has provided opportunities for Latter-day Saints who want to leave the faith to leave the faith. And so one of the things you see is that now in some surveys, Utah is really only about 51%, 52% Mormon if you ask people to self-identify. In other words, there are many people who are on official church rolls who have left the church and no longer self-identify as Latter-day Saints. And so the percentage of people who claim to be Mormon is much smaller than the percentage on church rolls. And what this does when you reach a critical mass is it changes the nature of Utah's religious subculture. So, you know, when Utah was 75% LDS, virtually everyone at your workplace, virtually everyone in your neighborhood frowned on coffee drinking. And now at work and now in the neighborhood, you probably have many kinds of social relationships that have redefined coffee drinking. And if you want to drink coffee or you're inclined to try coffee, you don't have to worry about opprobrium from the people in your neighborhood or your coworkers. You just have a different set of coworkers and a different set of neighbors. Young men used to feel incredible pressure to serve missions, even if they didn't want to, and I guess in some respects they still do. But now young Latter-day Saint boys who are not interested in serving a mission are much more likely to have non-LDS friends who understand why you don't want to go and don't think it's strange if you don't go. So you can escape. The religious subculture in Utah has lost a lot of its coercive power because of an increase of secular people who have moved in, who have then provided opportunities for Latter-day Saints who are inclined to leave the church to do so without social penalty. And finally, there are political reasons. Nationally, one of the things that we see is that the rise of the nuns is linked to the commingling of religious involvement in politics. And this is one of the reasons why apostasy from religion is so pronounced in the younger generations, to the extent that churches are meddling in politics. That really seems to turn younger Americans off. And one of the things that you see is that gay rights and other matters of sexuality have become issues for the church, and they are fighting against progress and in favor of more traditional views on gay rights and sexuality, and this turns young people off. And that's one of the reasons why they are leaving religion in droves, because they dislike the commingling of conservative politics and religion. And of course, Utah is a microcosm of this. You can see that younger people are more inclined to leave the LDS Church than older people are. The nuns are heavily concentrated among the young in Utah, just like they are in everywhere else. And of course, the church has been heavily involved in conservative politics. The church is seen as being involved or even controlling Utah politics, and they are particularly active in the area of gay rights and sexuality. So these cultural reasons, demographic reasons, and political reasons have all combined to make it so that when Latter-day Saints leave the church, they are not inclined to join other religious movements. Thank you very much for listening to my presentation.